Now, the story that I want to tell you began in 1971, and I suddenly got a letter which very much changed my life. It was from the technical general manager of the State Planning Board of Chile. He remarked in this letter that he had studied all my works, he had collected a team of scientists together, and would I please come and take it over? I could hardly believe it, as you can imagine. But this was to start me on a journey which made me travel 8,000 miles over and over and over again. I was commuting between London and Santiago for 2 years.
I can talk about Stafford forever. He was a fabulous man and an adorable father. When Stafford started up, it was just after the war. All the old guys had been killed. So a bright boy comes in alive and with a vision of a future and the ability to implement it. I remember, I must tell you this actually, it's just come back to me. I was sitting on the side of the bath watching him shave. So this was a very long time ago. And in fact, my feet didn't touch the floor. So a very, very long time ago. And he said, there are people that think I'm too young for what I do, you know? And I thought, oh, that must be mad. That was, it was a nice moment. I can see him now. He changed so many lives just by being himself, never mind the stuff he actually did. Everywhere he went, the risks of making change are in the soul, and he facilitated that.
Stafford was a hopeful us that can help us. Then, in the conversation with him, the Cybersyn appeared.
Stafford arrived to Chile in November of 1971. Now, November is the connection that Chile has with heaven. It's a beautiful, beautiful month of the year. We had the opportunity to get a group of about a dozen people in a very beautiful settings. Stafford started to explain his ideas. That was the beginning of us, and in particular of myself, to learn about the viable system model.
He began to realize that the human had characteristics that enabled it to continue functioning. And he asked himself what they were.
Regulation, monitoring, and all of that is done by balancing different parts of the body. The brain and all the capabilities that the brain has, the nervous system, the organs of the body, how do they come together in a cohesive whole? Each of the organs operates autonomously, except when things go out of certain levels of ability. You hit a stone with your foot, clearly until that moment you were not aware of your foot. At that point there is a signal that comes to the brain. It tells you, take care, do something.
Humans, we are viable. Once we are freed from our mothers, we need support, but we become viable creatures. And so he tried to establish a way of checking if a company was a viable system.
It's made up of 5 functions that are necessary for the management of any system. So the system has to have an identity and a purpose. It has to have some capacity for looking ahead and adjusting its behavior. It has to be able to manage and coordinate its activities. It has to be able to make sure that those activities don't get in each other's way. It has to have a way of overriding the normal activities and saying what's going on here. And then it actually has to do activities that gain some sort of benefit or reward in the larger system that it's embedded in.
The model is a model about cohesion, is about coordination, is about auditing, to understand organizations from the very general global organizations to the very local, individual plans from the point of view of managing their complexity. The viable system model was the most important aspect of that project.
You can run a model to see the impact of A onto B, an economic model of the country. And that's quite jolly, really. I mean, you can plan things. You can say, if I stop producing lapis lazuli, what will happen to the copper supply? You know, which incidentally seems to be ridiculously easy.
The Cybersyn model was very selective in the data that was collected. And the ARPANET and the big data that we're relying on now depends on gathering up everything in sight, like a vacuum cleaner, and sorting it later. There's so much possibility for error, and there's also so much temptation to be sloppy in how this work is done. Right now, we're kind of flirting with, how unstable can a society be before it stops being functional? Using the viable system model, you know what you're looking for.
Let me tell you what happened when I first explained it to President Allende himself. Allende was a doctor, a medical doctor, as you may know. And therefore, it was very easy to explain the model to him in terms of neuro-cybernetics as the way of controlling the body. And then I went into the business of controlling the state. And so I said to him, let us suppose that these elements of the state are the big departments of state, like foreign affairs and the economy and home affairs, so on. And then we'll have those, and the following things will happen, and then we must have a system 2, and I built it up on a piece of paper lying on the table between us. Then a system 3 and a system 4, and I got that far. And then I got to system 5, and I drew a big histrionic breath. And I said, I was going to say, this compañero presidente is you. Before I could say it, he suddenly smiled very broadly, and he said, System 5, at last, the people. That was a pretty powerful thing to happen. It had a very big influence on me. I can't go into that aspect, the political aspect, in this program. It's not what it's about. But I'm sure you'll bear in mind that I don't have to go and work in places where I don't want to be.
He met Allende and absolutely adored him, he fell for him. He just felt that resonance of camaraderie. I used to meet him at the airport whenever he came back. He was always a hard worker. He was the sort of man who didn't need a great deal of sleep. He slept about 4 hours, and the rest of the time he flew all over the place. So we spent a lot of time at airports. So for him, the whole package was very emotional. He was very anxious to get it right and to do justice to Allende and to the team. Poor man, he must have been exhausted most of the time, but he never seemed to be.
I begin to take the idea and transform it in pragmatical story.
The idea was quite far-fetched. If you get these British scientists coming and saying, you need to have a telecommunications network to run all the companies in the network. In the 1971, 72, you would say this guy is crazy.
Well, let's look at what present-day commercial networks do. First of all, they're only built by very big companies who can afford the expense of the design.
As people begin to use the network more and more, they must have, at the nodes of the network, major computer utility.
Specialized hardware facilities tend to be expensive, but very efficient.
The computers available in the country were very, very minimal. It would have been crazy, except that we found an extraordinary wealth of resources. So the previous government had the idea that telexes were relevant. They imported about 500 of these telex machines, which were left in the post office, and no one knew what to do with them.
And they strung them the length of the country. You know, Chile's like long and thin. And so they had telex machines arranged down them, and people programming information into the telex machines that came to the clunky IBM in the control room. So for the first time ever, there was real-time information.
In their Santiago control room, workers could sit in high-tech chairs and cycle through charts and graphs from across the country, discussing the data in as close to real time as the companies and wires could manage. In a world of annual projections and quarterly reports, Allende's Chile had something more like the news feeds of today, a real-time data stream continually showing the most up-to-date information. And because of it, Santiago became, in effect, a brain for the whole economy, complete with nerves constantly feeding information from the organs of industry.
With that ability to know what's happening pretty much not too long after it started to happen, the management has a little bit more leeway in terms of bringing a situation back from going off the rails. Essentially, the real-time management is about detecting incipient instability and providing a course correction before it's gone too far in the wrong direction.
Running things in real time, you can imagine it wasn't happening anywhere in the world. There was something new, there was something important happening.
The first year of the Allende government, 1971, was relatively successful in terms of its economic performance. The common Chilean could do better. There was growth. There was a dramatic decrease in unemployment. However, the same economic policies that created this temporary bonanza helped create the crisis that it started to unfold by the end of 1971.
The Nixon administration imposed a credit blockade against Chile. This credit blockade had a devastating impact on a developing country that vitally needed international trade.
The reaction to that created a lot of bad feelings towards the Allende government, and ever more towards Allende personally in the public, especially the middle classes that were not directly involved in the labor world.
Leading many members of that elite to call for Allende's resignation. The Chilean armed forces were not included in this credit blockade. Aid to the Chilean military multiplied. We were effectively setting the scene for a coup.
This atmosphere of bad faith, this atmosphere of suspicion, and this atmosphere of mobilization created the conditions for the strike of October 1972.
Owners of the trucking industry, not the truck drivers themselves, organized and arranged for strikes that devastated Chile.
The strike was originally a particular response to an attempt to expropriate one particular truck transportation business.
Those who were suffering became more and more concerned. And the concerns that they had were very much saying, we have to stop it. We cannot let it go.
The strike led to a larger response against the Allende government by other professionals and also of owners of small or middle-sized businesses.
By stopping the delivery of vitally needed goods, the economy came to a standstill.
People felt the government had to be overthrown.
The strike became a test of strength between the opposition and the government.
None of the other approaches that were used with centralized planning were working. The only option left was this notion of the operations room, this notion of the telex machines or the network, this notion of people passing messages in real time from one side to the other. All the network of communications that had been evolving was creating the conditions to run the economy in real time. At that point, in the middle of the strike, we could see companies sending messages saying, we are running out of oil, we are running out of stocks, we are running out of necessary people for certain operations and so on. And what was happening at that time, in a natural way, was to bring together all the resources required to keep this thing moving.
They were basically operating in real time, sleeping in the office, and directing goods where they needed to go. And basically, in real time, say where various supplies were, what streets were blocked, who could get what where. And so they broke the strike. They managed to succeed.
But Allende did have to concede in other things. For instance, Allende called the military into his cabinet for the first time in October 1972. From 1972 on, that was more of a tacit understanding. The Chilean military knew that the US would welcome a coup.
Stafford often thought afterwards that if that hadn't been so successful, perhaps the blowback and violence might have been less. But of course, there's no way to know that.
And that is the paradox in the whole thing. At the very moment that something was coming out, that something appeared to be working, the outcome of that was increase the risk for a coup d'etat.
En una palabra, es toda la estructura política del mundo la que está siendo socavada.
One journalist asked some truck drivers who were dining rather extravagantly where their money came from. And they laughed and said, from the CIA.